An astronaut, meaning sailor, is a person trained, equipped, and deployed by a human spaceflight program to serve as a commander or crew member aboard a spacecraft. Although generally reserved for professional space travelers, the terms are sometimes applied to anyone who travels into space, including scientists, politicians, journalists and tourists. Astronaut technically applies to all human space travelers regardless of nationality or allegiance. However, astronauts fielded by Russia or the Soviet Union are typically known instead as cosmonauts in order to distinguish them from American or otherwise NATO-oriented space travelers. Comparatively recent developments in manned spaceflight made by China and other East Asian nations have also led to the rise of the term taekwondo, although its use is somewhat informal and its origin is unclear. Until 2002, astronauts were sponsored and trained exclusively by governments, either by the military or by civilian space agencies. With the suborbital flight of the privately funded Spaceship One in 2004, a new category of astronaut was created: the commercial astronaut. The criteria for what constitutes human spaceflight vary, with some focus on the point where the atmosphere becomes so thin that centrifugal force, rather than aerodynamic force, carries a significant portion of the weight of the flight object. The Fédération Aéronautique Internationale are awarded astronaut wings. As of the 17th of November 2016, 552 people from 36 countries have reached 100 kilometers or more in altitude, of whom 549 reached low Earth orbit or beyond. Of these, 24 people have traveled beyond low Earth orbit, either to lunar orbit, the lunar surface, or, in one case, a loop around the moon. 3 of the 24, Jim Lovell, John Young and Eugene Cernan, did so twice. As of the 17th of November 2016, under the US definition, 558 people qualify as having reached space above 50 miles. Space travelers have spent over 41,790 man-days in space, including over 100 astronaut days of spacewalks. As of 2016, the man with the longest cumulative time in space is Gennady Padalka, who has spent 879 days in space. Peggy A. Whitson holds the record for the most time in space by a woman, 377 days. In 1959, when both the United States and Soviet Union were planning, but had yet to launch humans into space, NASA Administrator T. Keith Glennon and his Deputy Administrator, Hugh Dryden, discussed whether spacecraft crew members should be called astronauts or cosmonauts. Dryden preferred cosmonaut on the grounds that flights would occur in and to the broader cosmos, while the astro prefix suggested flight specifically to the stars. Most NASA Space Task Group members preferred astronaut, which survived by common usage as the preferred American term. When the Soviet Union launched the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin, in 1961, they chose a term which anglicizes to cosmonaut. A professional space traveler is called an astronaut. The first known use of the term astronaut, in the modern sense, was by Neil R. Jones in his 1930 short story, The Death's Head Meteor. The word itself had been known earlier. For example, in Percy Gregg's 1880 book Across the Zodiac, astronaut referred to a spacecraft. In Les Navigateurs de l'Infini by J.H. Rossini Ain, the word astronautique was used. The word may have been inspired by aeronaut, an older term for an air traveler first applied in 1784 to balloonists. An early use of astronaut in a non-fiction publication is Eric Frank Russell's poem, The Astronaut, appearing in the November 1934 Bulletin of the British Interplanetary Society. The first known formal use of the term astronautics in the scientific community was the establishment of the annual International Astronautical Congress in 1950, and the subsequent founding of the International Astronautical Federation the following year. NASA applies the term astronaut to any crew member aboard NASA spacecraft bound for Earth orbit or beyond. NASA also uses the term as a title for those selected to join its astronaut corps. The European Space Agency similarly uses the term astronaut for members of its astronaut corps. By convention, an astronaut employed by the Russian Federal Space Agency. Coinage of the term cosmonaut has been credited to Soviet aeronautics pioneer Mikhail Tikhondavov. The first cosmonaut was Soviet Air Force pilot Yuri Gagarin. Also the first person in space. He was part of the first 6 Russians, with German Titov, Yevgeny Kranov, Andrian Nikolaev, Pavel Popovich, and Grigory Nelyubov, who were given the title of pilot cosmonaut in January 1961. Valentina Tereshkova was the first female cosmonaut and the first and youngest woman to have flown in space with a solo mission on the Vostok 6 in 1963. On the 14th of March 1995, Norman Targard became the first American to ride to space on board a Russian launch vehicle, and thus became the first American cosmonaut. In Chinese, the term Yu Hang Yuan is strictly defined as